Recently, Baen Bar, an online forum for sci-fi fans, got removed from the internet as users' comments were investigated. What happened and why? Today's guest has a long track record with Baen Books, having published 67 novels with them, and he's here to tell us the whole story. Eric Flint, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hi, Eric. It's nice to see you in the flesh. I saw you at Superstars, but now you're here at the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
I was wondering, Lauren. I mean, I thought I read. Anyway, yeah, I was wondering. I had a feeling we must have met somewhere, but I was
Yeah.
where. It was a Superstars. Okay, great.
It was at Superstars, and I had a number of people say you got to talk to Eric Flint because he's very generous with his time especially when it comes to contracts.
Well, yeah, I do. I teach a course on how to read a contract, and also people who attend it. I give them my email address, and I tell them, if you have a contract, you want me to have any questions, get in touch with me. And I have any number of times helped people, including kept people from signing a number of contracts they really shouldn't have signed. So yeah, no, I do that, and yeah. Well, it's an interesting subject, and I now have my own publishing house, and I have probably the simplest contract in the industry. But in any event, go ahead.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you write, and how you started publishing with Baen Books, and let's hear a little bit about your own publishing company too.
I was first published. Well, actually, I started writing very young as a teenager. I wrote in high school and I wrote in college. But then I left college in 1971. I was in grad school. I left. And I became a political activist, mostly in the industrial trade unions. That's where I spent most of the next 30 years of my life. I didn't do much writing during that stretch because you sort of can't do both. But when I was well into my 40s, I had one novel in particular that I'd been working on since I was 22, and I wanted to finish it. And I didn't really actually have an ambition to be a writer. I just wanted to get that. I didn't want to be on my deathbed and not have at least tried to get it published. So I finished it. And I rewrote a chapter of it as a short story and sent it into the Writers of the Future contest, and I won first place in the winter quarter. That's how my career got started. And I didn't then get published again until I'm really a novelist, so I just didn't try to write short stories because it's not my forte. But I got this novel that I've been working on since I was 22 years old. I finished it, and I got an agent, and she warned me it was going to be a very hard novel to sell because it's strange, which it is. And she was right. We get kind of odd rejection letters. We wouldn't get them like, this isn't good enough. We'd be like, well, this is really good, and I like it, but it's not suitable for us, that kind of thing. So I told my agent, Shauna, just take it off the market, because in the meantime, in the fall of 93, I wrote a straight science fiction novel called Mother of Demons. And that was actually the first book I sold. And my agent sent it to several publishers. One of them was Baen Books, which I would myself not have thought of sending it to, but she did. And Toni Weisskopf read it and liked it. And she recommended it to Jim Baen, the publisher. And then I had to wait 6 months for him to get around writing it. It was kind of nerve-wracking. That was back in 96. And Jim liked it. And he called me up. He wanted to talk to me. And what was interesting was what he really wanted to talk to me about was politics, not the book. Because he could tell from reading it that I didn't have his political views. He was quite conservative about most things. But I didn't seem to be a liberal either, so he was just curious. So anyway, I said, give me 10, 15 minutes. I'll give you my whole political history in a nutshell, and we can go from there. So I told it, which I had been a member of the socialist movement for, since 1970 in an organized way. I gave my whole political history. We talked politics for about 2 hours. And at the end of it, I'll never forget this. He said, well, I guess if John Campbell could get along with Mac Reynolds, I can get along with you. For those people who don't understand the reference, Mac Reynolds is one of Analog's major authors in the 60s. And his father, well, he was a member of the Socialist Labor Party, and his father actually ran for president of the United States on the Socialist Labor Party ticket twice in the 40s or 50s. So that's how I got started with Jim. And my first novel came out in September of 97. And then he hooked me up with David Drake, and we did a series together, which is, Jim would do that. He'd sort of actually shelter new authors by hooking them up with established authors, sort of help you get through that rough initial years. And sometimes it works, and it did in my case. And then I did my next solo novel, which is 1632. I wrote it in 1999. It came out early in 2000, and that was, what people call a breakout novel. That was very popular, and from then on, my career took off. And I've been with Baen ever since. I did publish 2 novels through Del Rey, and I published a book through Art Manor Press. And since I've had my own publishing house, which started a few years ago, I've published 2 novels through that because I offered them to Toni, but she wanted some changes in them, which I understood why. It wasn't like I thought she was nuts, but I just didn't want to do them because I liked it the way it was. And then I took it to Jen Gunnels, one of the editors at Tor, and she had about the same reaction Toni did. So I went and talked to my 2 co-authors, and I said, look, we can get us published commercially, but we'd have to do the following rewrites. And they had my attitude. They didn't want to. We liked it the way it was. So by then I had my own publishing house, and we just published it. And so all told, I have, as of right now, 71 novels out. All of them are still in print, except the 2 through Del Rey. They've let them go out of print, but Baen has picked up the series. So I will be writing a 3rd book in it toward the end of this year. And at some point, Baen, I have the rights to those books back, so Baen will reissue them. So they'll come back in print. And that's really the history of it. I edited Baen's, Jim Baen had a magazine going for 4 years, Jim Baen's Universe, which he asked me to edit, which I did. And I've had my own magazine going since 2007 called the Granville Gazette, which is devoted mostly to the 1632 series. And I own that. Jim lent me the money to get it launched, but, it's mine, not his. And that's been a professional magazine for the whole time. I mean, it pays professional rates, has a regular scheduled production. The Science Fiction Writers Association has recognized it as a qualifying venue for professionals for 14 years now. So I've done a lot in publishing. I mean, I've got a pretty well-rounded experience I've also been an agent, although I've never taken money.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So that's a long, stellar career, and right at the beginning of it, there's Jim Baen, and he's calling you on the phone because he's curious about your politics.
Yeah. No, Baen is known from literally day one, my political views, and they don't agree with me, and Jim didn't, Toni doesn't, but it's never been an issue because, well, I make the joke.
I personally love that.
Always have to explain to people how capitalism works. The reason I keep getting published is because I sell well. I mean, it's really not any more complicated than that. And my books make money for publishers. That's why I stay in print.
Right.
I do not write socialist novels. I think fiction is a terrible way to try to get across your political viewpoint because, first of all, people resent it. because they expect to be entertained, not having you lecture at them. And secondly, it's just a lousy way to do it, because any political argument you advance, I don't care what your viewpoint is, you have to abstract the individual out of the equation, or else you just can't talk, because everybody's different. So you have to subtract the individual out and talk about people as groups of people. Well, that's fine in politics, but stories are all about individual people. That's what they're about. And if you don't make your characters seem real to people, if they seem like just cardboard cutouts, people don't like it. I mean, it just bores them. So I do not try to inject my politics into my novels. What fiction is really good for is sort of imparting what you might call broad ethical or social values. It's very good for that. But those are very broad. A lot of people can share them that don't agree on politics. So that's kind of what I focus on.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of another socialist that conservatives like to quote, George Orwell. He's a favorite of mine. I've read Animal Farm many times in 1984. And he's a socialist who speaks to the truth of, what he sees going on in the world around him. And decades later, we're like, oh, this is still so true, and I can see connections.
Yeah, and he's not lecturing people. That's the key thing you want to avoid, is you don't want to natter at people. It's also, I consider it dishonest. It's like false advertising. If I want to write a political tract, and I have written many in my life, if you were to go back and put together all the things I wrote as a political activist, it'd probably be about 6-7 volumes all told. Well, I could do that, but they wouldn't sell well. I wouldn't be able to make a living on it. That's for damn sure. And I just consider false advertising to sort of say to people, I've written a novel that you will find entertaining to read, and then they discover you're smuggling.
Yeah.
I just think it's dishonest. Anyway.
Well, you didn't write 6 or 7 novels about socialism, but you did write an essay about Baen Bar controversy, and socialism and politics is at the heart of this controversy. So, what got you involved in this online kerfuffle? What is this online kerfuffle? What happened?
What the issue is that Tony Weisskopf got invited by Discon 3, which is this year's World Science Fiction Convention, to be their editor guest of honor. And then a person named Jason Sanford wrote what he called an investigative report on Baen's Bar, which is the discussion area that Baen has set up that's been in existence for almost 30 years, where people can come, and it's quite active. Baen was, I think, the first publisher to ever do this kind of thing, at least in science fiction, and it's been around for a very long time. So he did a report on it, and the report was highly critical of Baen's Bar, and in particular, it's critical because he argued that it was a place where right-wing and often violent or offensive discourse was promoted and pushed. And based on that hit the news, and there was a big ruckus over it. And within an extremely short time, I think it was like 4 days, Tony Weisskopf shut the bar down when the report came out and said, look, I will look at this and see. But within, I think it was 4 days or 5 days, less than a week, World Science Fiction Convention disinvited her as a guest of honor. That's what the ruckus was. The reason I hadn't really initially no intention of getting into it. But the same thing happened years ago with the Hugo controversy, which I also had no intention of getting involved in. But then I got dragged into it because Breitbart named me as one of the right-wing authors that were being penalized by the Hugos. And I said, geez, no, you're not going to do this. So that's when I started writing. Well, what happened with Jason Sanford wasn't that extreme. He did not mischaracterize my viewpoint. But he did mention me in one sentence, and what irritated me was I felt that he was sort of using me to sort of cover what he was doing. It was sort of, he said, well, I mean, Baen doesn't just simply publish right wingers. There's Eric Flint, for instance. And then he went on. I need to make something clear, which I did not, I think, probably make clear in my essay, which is I characterized what he wrote as a hit piece, which is what it is. But I needed to make clear there's nothing wrong with writing a hit piece. I've written lots of them in my days as a political activist. What I objected to was that he characterized what he was doing as an investigative report. That's what he called it, as if what he was doing was investigative journalism. And that's something very different. And it's not what he was doing. And the way you can tell is very simple. One of the fundamental rule, or one of them anyway, of investigative journalism is you talk to the people you're investigating to see what they have to say about what you're doing. I mean, if you ever see the movie All the President's Men, you see it happen several times. Either one of the reporters or the editor would call up Attorney General John Mitchell. This is so-and-so from the Washington Post. We are going to be running a story that depicts you as a minion of Satan. What do you have to say in response to that? You know, that's what you do. And he did not talk. I mean, he made no attempt to get in touch with Baen Books, anybody in Baen Books, Tony, me, anybody, to see what they might have to say. And it shows in the nature of the report he wrote. There are some things that he says in it that are true. It's not that he didn't point to some problems, because there are some, but I felt the whole thing was just completely slanted, and it was just written in such a way as to give people an impression that Baen's book, first of all, as a publisher, was essentially a publisher of right-wing authors. That's how I got into it, because, I said, excuse me, my name's Eric Flint, and I've been published more often by Baen Books than any other author they have over the past 24 years in terms of new titles. So I'm sorry, and I am definitely not right-wing. And it's not just me. Mercedes Lackey is one of Baen's main authors, and Misty is certainly not right-wing. Sharon Lee and Steve Miller are popular authors of theirs, and they were delegates for Bernie Sanders in 2016. I mean, Baen actually has a very wide spread of authors in terms of their political views. They do have some major authors of right-wing opinions. Larry Correia and John Ringo are the two best known. But to try to characterize them as, it really put a bad taste in my mouth. And then it sort of continued all the way through. There are statements he made, some of which were just flat wrong. Some of which were not wrong, but in my opinion, I don't know how to put it, grossly exaggerated. I mean, he would have statements like, there are tons of statements, and it's like, well, wait a minute. And the one that irritated me when he said that the Baen Bar is very definitely tilted toward the right. And I run 6-7 conferences in Baen Bar, which is more than anybody. And my conferences are the most heavily trafficked in Baen Bar and have been for a long time. So I'm sorry, what do you mean it's mostly tilted to the right when the center of gravity of it is what I do? And mine aren't tilted to the left either. They're apolitical. I mean, we're using them to produce a magazine. But it's things like that that just kept irritating me about his thing. Where it just, he did everything he could to present Baen in a bad light. Let's put it that way, and Baen Bar. And
yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like probably quite a bit of the, pushback from what happened is almost like a jump off point for people to do exactly that, is to put that slander against one way or four, just to ensure that their opinion, as you're saying, kind of gets that tilt that they want people to feel. So with that, James S. Aaron asks, how much of this dust up is more a misunderstanding, of like two internet cultures, say between online forums versus Twitter. So what's your...
Some of it's a misunderstanding. Part of the problem is that Baen Bar has been around for a very long time, almost 30 years. And people like me, I first came on to Baen Bar, I believe, probably 97. So it's been, 24 years? And it has a long history. It was the first of as far as I know, any publisher in any genre, as far as I know, setting up a full-fledged discussion area on its website. And Jim had a very sort of freewheeling attitude toward things. And so, he would say they would have discussions of his books, but he happened to be a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so they set up a conference where people could talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It was things like this. It was kind of like, we'll talk about anything. And the irony of the conferences where the stuff that Sanford objected to, the what he felt were offensive or in some cases violent, political rhetoric, where they were concentrated. There were a few conferences. One of them was named Politics, another is named Blazes. Those are the two main ones. There's another one that I really never went into called Truth versus Pravda. That was a hobby horse of Jim's. I'm not quite even sure what he planned with it. But the two main ones were Politics and Blazes. And the irony of it is, those were actually set up originally to quarantine the political discussion and get it away from everybody else, because what was happening was political discussion was breaking out all over. And most people got tired of it, because what invariably happens with these things, and anybody who's been online for any period of time knows what happens, a political discussion argument gets started. And then before too long, two guys, it's usually two guys, sometimes a woman's involved, but it's usually guys, two or maybe three, go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and they just won't shut up, and they go on and on and on and on. You know what I'm talking about? And people get tired of it. And so they set up Politics and Blazes, so go over there and have your arguments so the rest of us don't have to listen to it. So that was the origins of it. And Blazes was specifically set up as, Jim thought it was funny, so did I, to be honest. There's a kind of virtual dueling ground where it was like, if you really can't stop arguing with each other, go to Blazes where, there are no rules. You can do whatever you want. But just get it away from the rest of us. So that was the origins of it. And I stopped going into those most people didn't go to them because you knew what was happening over there, and maybe you'd drop by and say, oh boy. Well, that's one culture. The other is, well, you should have been monitoring to see what happened. Well, no, most people weren't monitoring because we didn't want to know what was being said in it, because it was frankly boring to most of us. So that's a clash of cultures, I guess you could call it. And so when Sanford, if you read my essay, you'll see part of what my reaction was. And when Sanford said, this is really important, and my reaction, why am I supposed to care that somebody with a phony name, because they're always pseudonyms, is a jackass? I mean, no, I'm sorry. I'm busy. I've got better and more important things to do. But so that's a clash of, well, no, it's something you got to clean up. Well, I'm willing to accept that, all right, we probably got sloppy about it and let it go too long. And yeah, we probably do need to clean it up. There is one comment made that Sanford quoted that is definitely clearly beyond the pale. There's one, absolutely no question about it. Some person with a pseudonym called for doxing the police officer, or may have been a Secret Service agent, whoever shot and killed the woman in the Capitol who tried to break into the area. I've forgotten her name. And he advocated doxing them. And it's like, no, that is absolutely beyond the pale. In fact, I don't think it's prosecutable. I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer, but I think they'd have to be able to prove that he actually tried to do something instead of just shooting his mouth off. I don't know, but I don't care. I don't want stuff like that around. There were some other things that Sanford pointed to that I thought were certainly in bad taste, and that I disliked. But so, okay, my attitude was, all right, I'm okay with cleaning some of this stuff up. I am. And so was Tony. Because we knew this is stuff that had been developing for years and years and years and years, and it kind of just got ignored.
Well, kind of the rules of the internet have changed, right?
Well, that's part of it. Yeah, no, that's part of it. Baen Bar was set up at the very beginning, and it just kind of, there weren't really any rules. We were sort of figuring out our own. And yeah, you're right. So Tony shut down the bar when the report came out. And which was the right thing to do, and just said, okay, fine, I will take a look at it. What really ticked me off was when Discon disinvited her within 3 days, I think. And at that point, it's like, okay, these are not people trying to solve any problem. These are just people whose sole concern is virtue signaling. And I just have no use for it. I come from a very different political tradition. It's a tradition whose focus is on accomplishing something, getting something done, winning a fight, or if you can't win, holding your ground, or at least, cutting your losses, whatever. But the whole focus is on getting something done and accomplishing something. And the focus of these people is on just making sure the whole world knows that they're clean and virtuous and fully woke. And frankly, I have nothing but contempt for it. It's just, this is not, it's just utterly alien to me. And I say that as a socialist. It's utterly alien to me as somebody who was active in the civil rights movement, in the labor movement, in the anti-war movement. And I remember, to give an example, what I'm trying to illustrate, a few years back, some college, university, I don't remember which one it was. I don't remember how she got invited, but Ann Coulter had been invited to speak. And a huge ruckus erupted, and there was a campaign to disinvite her, and she was disinvited. And I remember thinking, how in God's name do you manage to generate public sympathy for one of the most vicious, meanest, nastiest people in America? But they managed to do it. Because that's all this does. That's all you accomplish with this disinviting crap is, you're not gaining anything. I don't know what they thought they were going to gain. I don't know. I can tell you what, if their purpose was to damage Tony Weiscott's reputation, I can guarantee you that didn't work. They generated sympathy for her among most people. Most professionals in the industry have a high opinion of Tony. And she's personally well liked, and people have a lot of respect for what she's done as both a publisher and editor. And the opinion of most people, not all, but most, is that this was just really unfair and uncalled for. It's not going to hurt Baen books if that was the goal, because, some people will. I don't know how to put this. John Ringo and I disagree on practically everything when it comes to politics, but there's one thing John and I have always seen eye to eye about, which is whenever anybody threatens they're not going to buy our book because we're politics, we tell them to go take a hike. I mean, it's like, fine, don't buy my books. I don't give a damn. And I'll tell you what actually happens is for every reader you lose, you gain at least that many. So No damage was done to Tony. No damage was done to Baen books. And however, WorldCon picked up another ding because it's just getting more and more. I don't know. When I lived in Morgantown, West Virginia, there was a bar on the outskirts of town called the Haystack, and the standard joke about it was you got a free fight with every drink. And out of curiosity, I went in once. This is in my drinking days. I don't drink. I quit drinking 30 years ago because I have to. I'm an alcoholic. But this is back in my drinking days. And I think that may be the only bar I've ever been in where I walked out before I finished my beer. Just because I looked around and said, get out of here. I could tell already. I was a stranger and people were, no, out, go. And I'm sorry, but we're kind of starting to get that reputation. It's like, geez, And what's happening, it's been going on for quite a while anyway. There are objective reasons why it's going to happen, but this is just going to speed it up, is you're just getting a movement of the center of gravity of science fiction fandom, and especially professionals, from WorldCon to Dragoncon. And this will speed it up. And I'm sure that's not what they intended either, but that's what happens. Anyway, I've talked long enough. I'm sure people
for like this first part of the show, like my biggest takeaway is that Baen gave, their fan base, all the people that wanted to be on Baen's Bar, a place to, hash out these political conversations and keep it away from everything else that's super fun and interesting for everyone else. And now, people are using that as a way to accomplish whatever they're trying to accomplish. That is my personal takeaway. Mm-hmm. I will say. But before we continue on, hold your thought really, really quick, Eric. I'm going to do a quick spotlight, and then we can finish up. All right. Sure. So today's spotlight is on 1632, Ring of Fire series, Book 1, The Ultimate Y2K Glitch. In the year 1632 in northern Germany, a reasonable person might conclude that things couldn't get much worse. There was no food. Disease was rampant. For over a decade, religious war had ravaged the land and the people. Catholic and Protestant armies marched and counter-marched across the northern plains, laying waste the cities and slaughtering everywhere. In many rural areas, population plummeted toward zero. Only the aristocrats remained relatively unscathed. For the peasants, death was a mercy. Meanwhile, in 2000, things are going okay in Grantville, West Virginia. The mines are working, the buck are plentiful, it's deer season, and everybody's tending the wedding of Mike Stern's sister, including the entire membership of the local chapter of the United Mine Workers of America, which Mike leads, is having a good time. Then everything changed. When the dust settles, Mike leads a small group of armed miners to find out what's going on. Out past the edge of town, Grantville's asphalt road is cut, as with a sword. On the other side, a scene out of hell. A man nailed to a farmhouse door, his wife and daughter lying, screaming in muck at the center of a ring of attentive men in steel vests. Faced with this, Mike and his friends don't have to ask who to shoot. At that moment, freedom and justice, American style, are introduced to the middle of the 30 Years' War. Get your copy today! Click buy now or doom.
And that's the first book in your Ring of Fire series, Book 1. Mm-hmm. And we actually had a question about that ahead of time. Scott McGlasson wonders if Sterling's Island in the Sea of Time was an inspiration for that book.
No, it wasn't at all. There's actually a funny story about that. No, I had seen Steve's book on the shelves in a bookstore, but I thought it was a fantasy novel just from the cover. I didn't look at it. I just saw the cover and said, "Oh, that's interesting. Steve wrote a fantasy novel," because it's not usually what he writes. No, I had no idea about his book or what it was about. And the first I found out about it was after I finished 1632 and had turned it in. I was talking to David Drake, whom I had by then co-authored several novels with, as a friend of mine. And I mentioned, described to him what the novel was about. And he said, "Have you read Steve Sterling's Isle in the Sea of Time?" And I got this, feeling of absolute terror, which is, oh God, because this does happen to authors. It's Robert Forward stole an idea from me, and he didn't. He just came out with it first, and it was just too close to what I was going to write, so I never was able to write that book. But anyway, I just said, "Oh God, don't tell me." And Dave said, "Relax." He said, "The general idea is the same in the sense of a collective town, or in this case, Nantucket Island, being moved in time." But he said the stories are so different, it's not going to be a problem. But no, and I've talked to Steve about it, and we're both kind of bemused by the fact that sort of almost at the same time, he's a little ahead of me, we both had the idea of doing a time travel story using a collective protagonist. And we're trying to figure out why nobody did it before us, because it seems like an obvious idea, but that's how things work. But anyway, no, the two were never connected to each other.
The idea was just so big, it had to be split amongst two authors.
Yeah.
Well, history buffs, they look back in history and they kind of wish they had a time machine to some interesting time period. So that's the Peasants' War, the 30 Years' War.
Yeah, actually, I'd had the idea for the book. I lived in that area of West Virginia. I lived in Morgantown for a year and a half, and I was politically active in the area. I knew it quite well. And I knew all those small coal mining towns stretched out down Route 250. And I remember not at the time, because I wasn't thinking of writing back then, but a little later on, I remember when I think back on it, that one of those coal mining towns would make a great collective protagonist for some kind of adventure, because a town like that is actually quite self-sufficient in a lot of ways. And furthermore, also is able to defend itself, because anybody who knows rural America, especially that part of the country, knows that in a small town, there's going to be a lot of weapons. And I got criticized after the book came out by a reviewer who said he enjoyed the book, but that the depiction of the number of guns was completely unrealistic. And actually, where I got the estimate was I interviewed the police chief of Mannington, which is the town I use as the model, and I just asked him what his estimate was. So that's where I got it. So that's where the idea came from, but I didn't know what the adventure was, and it just sat there in the back of my mind for years. And then the reason I read up on 30 Years' War was I was going to write a novel with David Drake that he plotted out that never got written, as it turned out, but it involved a group of alien mercenaries coming. Basically, a war broke out between China and Vietnam in the near future, and then a band of alien mercenaries offered their services to the Vietnamese. That was the idea of the novel. And David had not developed the background of the aliens particularly. So I said, "Would you mind if I did?" He said, "No, go ahead." So I figured, well, the great age of mercenaries was the Renaissance and early modern period, and probably the single biggest period was 30 Years' War. There were mercenary armies all throughout. So I figured, all right, I hadn't studied the 30 Years' War since college, which was 30 years ago then. So I pulled out, I didn't pull out, I actually had to go buy it, I didn't own it anymore. C.V. Wedgwood wrote the classic history. It's 30 Years' War. It was written back in the 30s, but it's still a classic. And I started reading it. And about halfway through, I realized this is it. This is the perfect place, because it's such utter chaos to put this small town. Anyway, that's how the whole thing got started. And it's now up to Got a novel coming out in May that I wrote with Grib Barber. I think that's the 25th novel in a series that Baen has published, I believe. So it's been going a very long time, which I didn't expect. I wrote the book as a standalone. I never intended it to become a series.
You're still muted, Lauren.
I'm sorry?
Sorry.
She was muted. She was asking a question, but she was muted.
Oops. Jay Clifton later says, not a hillbilly, but an Appalachian American.
Well, okay. There's an interesting, at least when I lived there, the term hillbilly was acceptable. The term that was not acceptable in northern West Virginia was redneck. That was redneck was a mean, nasty, stupid, ignorant person. That's what that was. Hillbilly was okay. But, politically correct terms shift over time, and I still have the terminology that I moved there in 1977 and lived there till 1979. So that was 40 years ago.
Jay might have been joking. But you are right that the rules do change over time. And to go back to the Baen's books controversy, I think that's part of people's concerns. Is there's this feeling that publishers, newspapers, platforms, conferences ought to be held responsible for giving a platform to dangerous ideas, that there's a responsibility of them to kind of monitor what's being said. What do you think about that idea? Like,
it's a real issue, and it's a complex one. But certainly, if you're a publisher, is where it really gets tricky is when you're dealing with people who will say that we're simply providing a service, like for instance, a telephone company. It's like, we're just providing people with the service to talk to each other on the phone. We're not monitoring what people say. But then does that same thing apply to a company that, like a publisher that's doing publishing? And, no, obviously you can't be as because you're not in the business of just providing a service. You are to some degree responsible for whatever happens on it. And like I said, if the only thing that had come out of this was that Sanford had pointed to, hey, some of this stuff gets pretty rough, which it does. I mean, he's right about that. I would not have objected to that, because it would have been, times have changed, and I'm explaining the history of Baen Bar, and that's how it developed the way it did. But just because somebody develops a certain way doesn't mean you don't ever at some point say, well, maybe I should stop doing that. I mean, I came out of a heavy drinking background, and at a certain point I realized I got to quit drinking, I would not have objected. I just felt that what he did was really unfair and unbalanced. And then in particular, I just thought that what the WorldCon did was just pretty rotten. It's just, I don't know. It's just kind of like, it's not like they were under a time crunch. I mean, if they'd been under a time crunch, maybe, but the WorldCon's months away. I mean, they had plenty of time. They could have at least taken enough time to say, well, let's see what Tony Weisskopf and Baen come up with, by the way, of redoing the bar. But no, they just pulled the trigger right away, and they're almost right away, and that really rubbed me the wrong way, and it's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. There's no, and the other thing that you will hear is that the political climate has changed. Things are much more polarized today, and so forth. And there's truth to that. But what is also bothering me is people have a tendency to overreact. It's kind of a natural human tendency, but you have to be careful about it. And I don't want to see happening. It won't be as bad, but I can see it already, the steam developing. I don't want to see happening what happened after 9/11. When all kinds of really terrible things are done. The Patriot Act is grotesque, in my opinion. Department of Homeland Security is just a bloated bureaucratic monstrosity. 98% of what the Transportation Security Administration does is just theater. It's got nothing to do with security. Not to mention waterboarding, setting up Guantanamo. It goes on and on. And, there was a whole period where, there was a Muslim terrorist under every bush and underneath every rock. And I don't want to see the same thing happening the other way around. Where I know people have been calling for, we need laws against domestic terrorism. I am not in favor of laws against domestic terrorism because those laws always get abused. When you pass these kind of broad laws and give the authorities all kinds of leeway to interpret stuff, who gets to define terrorism, number one? So, no, nothing had happened on January 6th. Everything that happened was already illegal. So, you don't need to pass these, and just be careful. It's the old saying, be careful what you wish for, you may get it. So that's kind of bothering about this whole dynamic. I felt in the course of reading Sanford's essay to some degree, to a considerable degree actually, I felt it was alarmist. I don't know how else to put it. It's like, yeah, some of the conversation and political discourse on Baen Bar is cruddy, and it can have certainly violent overtones to it, and a lot of it stupid as all hell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But no, the next storming of the Capitol is not being organized out of Baen Bar. Get a grip. Some of those people may have daydreams about it. I don't know, but it's not going to happen there. And that's part of what gets to me is that people just sort of lose any common sense at all, or at least there's a tendency to it. And I think that happened at least to a degree here.
One question I've seen come up on Facebook is Tony getting disinvited. Is this a case of cancel culture, her being canceled, or is this a case of consequences as the head of?
Yeah. Okay. My problem starts with the terminology, because nothing irritates me more than seeing right-wingers complain about cancel culture, because they practice it faster and more aggressively than anybody does. It's just they don't call it that. What do you call what happened to Colin Kaepernick? All the man did was put a knee down on grass or astroturf. And his career got wrecked. Same thing was done to the Dixie Chicks. For years, decades now, the right-wing evangelicals have been doing everything in their power, and have been quite successful in driving the teaching of evolution out of the schools. What the hell is that? That's cancel culture. It's just right-wingers will call it patriotism or deeply held religious beliefs or whatever, but it's the same thing. You're essentially trying, I periodically get people who don't like me putting up, it happened a few months back again, somebody put up a picture of a guy being thrown out of a helicopter on my Facebook page, and I titled it "Commie One-Way Helicopter Rides." And apparently it hasn't figured to him that military dictatorships that murder people are cancel culture big time. So let's start with that. As far as consequences go, my problem is that I find that often people on the left aren't willing to accept the consequences either, because if you attack people, they get to fight back. I'm sorry, that's how it works, and you can't very well complain. There are quite a few people complained about the essays I wrote in response to Sanford, and it's like, what? He gets to attack and I don't get to fight back? Sorry, that's not how the world works. So I don't think those terms are particularly useful, number one. I think what they wind up becoming is just code terms that in the case of cancel culture, it's code for the right. In the case of consequences, code for the left. I don't know how to put it, but I don't think you're clarifying very much by using that terminology. Let's put it that way. And as far as what happened to Tony, I don't consider it cancel culture. You can use that term, but to me, there are two very different, I'll call them traditions, for political struggle. I'm used to what came out of one, which is where the whole focus is on getting something accomplished, winning something, or at least defending something. But that's the whole orientation. The orientation is not really to accomplishing anything; is to make sure that you look good. That no matter what, you are clearly a pure person and not a bad thinking person. And I just, and you can see that down on the right too. I just don't have any use for it. I mean, it's like, I don't know. I found out from 3 years back, Greg Benford got in trouble at WorldCon because he used the word honey in the course of something he said. He wasn't addressing it to any woman. He just, it happened to come up in a sentence, and somebody blew their stack and accused him of sexism, and he got marched out. I'm not sure they threw him out of the whole convention or just his signing, but he got in trouble. And since then, WorldCon has apologized, and actually they made him their guest of honor this year. But this is the kind of kerfuffle I'm talking about. It's look. When I would be in the trade unions and we would be trying to organize something, might be an organizing drive, might be a civil rights issue came up, might be labor solidarity, whatever. We would get together to plan out what we were going to do. And very often we'd get together at a working class blue collar diner somewhere, and 50% of the time at least, a waitress who came up to take our order would call somebody honey. And pretty much as often, somebody sitting at the table, could be a man, would refer to her as honey. And what I did not do was stop, outrage, we must deal, Jesus Christ. No, I don't use the term myself, well, except for my wife, but Jesus, I mean, it's not really the biggest deal in the world. We got other fish to fry. So, I just let it go. And I give the waitress a good tip too. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Is just two different ways of approaching the world and looking at it. And I'm just not real impressed with people who seem to be really, really more concerned than anything else with making sure everybody understands that they are right-thinking people. Fine, congratulations, good for you. And that and $3.75 will get you a cup of something at Starbucks.
Well, it sounds like Jim Baen's kind of stands in contrast to all of that, right? He calls you up, he wants to know about your politics, he finds out you're a socialist and he's conservative, he talks to you for hours and then starts publishing your books and publishing and publishing and publishing.
Yeah, no, it was something I appreciate about Jim. We did not agree on many things, although Jim could be complicated too. He wasn't a stereotype. He's a very intelligent man, and he was furious at George Bush over Katrina and thought he should have been impeached for Katrina, for instance. He was furious before that when the weapons of mass destruction never turned up in Iraq, because he felt he'd been lied to. So he wasn't a caricature. Look, I get along fine with Larry Correa, and he and I have talked politics many times. We don't agree way more often than not, but I get along fine with Larry. I mean, I get along with plenty of people, and it's just, I don't know. I always had a lot of respect for Jim, and I had a lot of respect for Tony too. Same thing. I've never been put under any political pressure at Baen Books, and I have a lot more artistic freedom at Baen Books than I'd ever have at any other publisher. I've dealt with corporate publishers, and they are no fun at all. It's not that, people, look, not everybody got along with Jim, and not everybody gets along with Paul. One characteristic of this sort of more traditional style publishing, where it's publishing houses are very much, one person operations, really. If you deal with Dahl, you're pretty much going to be dealing with Betsy Wolheim, for instance. You know, it means that if you get along well, great, but you don't always, or you just don't see eye to eye, whatever, in which case, okay, move on somewhere else. But Jesus, corporate publishers can drive you nuts because you never know who you're dealing with. I got when I was at Del Rey, I got along fine with my editors, but they weren't the ones who got to make the final decision. Went up to some bean counter or something. I never knew who. Some of that's just my temperament. But anyway.
So where does that
Yeah, I've been very happy. I've been very happy at Baen Books. That's why I stayed with them.
Yeah, they're a good publisher. But where does that leave authors in 2021? Should we stay away from politics as being too divisive and maybe breaking up our audience? Or is that like a way to find your tribe? Or how would you advise authors with regards to politics?
The single most important thing I caution authors about is do not shove your politics into your novel. I, for instance, with my publishing house, I will publish right-wing authors. There's at least one I know I'm publishing, and another one I probably will be if he completes the project. And I'm fine with that. But if they try to shove their political views into the novel, I'll say no. And Jim would do the same with me, which I would not have. I didn't do it anyway. But, so one, keep your politics out of your books because that really does aggravate people. Number one. And secondly, it will make things difficult for your publisher sometimes. So that's the first thing. Beyond that, a lot of it's a matter of temperament too, to be honest with you. I mean, I know authors, some of whom are friends of mine, and some of whom are co-authors of mine, and they just don't like to talk politics. And it's not that they don't have political views; they just don't particularly want to air them about. Toni Weisskopf is one of them. Toni hardly ever says anything publicly about politics, if you look. I mean, she has political views, but unlike Jim Baen, who did not hesitate to express himself, Toni usually doesn't. It's kind of a matter of personal choice, but in my case, it would have been kind of silly not to, because I don't know how to put it. I discovered many, many, many years ago, like when I was in my early 20s, that if people didn't like you or didn't like your politics because you were a socialist, you were going to get called a commie no matter what. I mean, there was no way you weren't going to get called a commie. So there was no way and no point in. I made it a point early in my life that I was always straight up about what my political views were. The only exception was when I'd start work at a new company, if it had a union contract, there was always a period of probation where they could fire you for any reason for the first 3 months, or in oil refineries for the first 6 months. And I would keep my mouth shut during that stretch. Because once I passed it and I was in the union, then they had to have cause to fire me. They couldn't just do it because they didn't like me. But other than that, I've always been quite straight up about my political views. And but not everybody has the same temperament I do, and so I don't know. People do. The only one thing I would say is keep the hell out of your damn books. Or if you can't keep it out of your books, fine. Then write a book on politics that's clearly what you're doing, and so people know when they buy it that you're not smuggling it in.
Then what about on social media? Do you think...
Again, it's kind of the same thing. Look, if you go, I don't put up, how do I put it? I do not usually put up political posts on my Facebook page. because that's not why people come there. I usually am mostly talking either about myself or about my writing, or actually the biggest readership I ever got was 4 years ago when I had cancer, and I was just discussing cancer, and Jesus, I get a whole lot of people reading that. I think because I'm one of the few people who can sort of find humor in cancer, which is possible. But occasionally I will. If it's something I feel strongly enough about, and but also I have a superpower. I can walk away from an internet argument, and I have what I call my 3-post rule, which is I will post on a subject 3 times, and that's it. And I might not even go to 3. And then I'm walking away from this, because I'm not going to get into these time sinks where, somebody wants to keep arguing with you. It's like, you want to keep talking about it, go ahead, but I'm out of here. And what I found is if you do that, the other person usually just goes away. That's kind of the way I do it, but not everybody, I have friends who put nothing up politically on their Facebook page, and I have others who mostly what they put up on their Facebook page is their political opinions. My editor, he's the editor of both the magazine, he's the editor of Publishing House. He's very free about expressing his political opinions, and I don't object to it, It's his Facebook page. He can do whatever he wants. So I think you really just have to, I don't know.
So for me, at the end of the day, see if I can try and succinct my thoughts. When you're getting into these arguments, rather than this virtue signaling, I am pure, this other thing over here is, what's going on? But look at me, look, all this good stuff that's going on there. Have, like you're saying, what is it that you want to gain out of this? And then do everything you can to get to that end. So like if you're talking about a certain person or people or a company like Baen Books, talk to those people. Put that into, the blog posts that you might be making, so that it's not just a one-sided conversation of opinion. It becomes a multifaceted understanding of your opinion of a situation, if that makes sense.
If that's it's like I said at the beginning, people can write hit pieces. I mean, it's legitimate. I mean, it's a type of public discourse where you're attacking someone. I have done it. And it's just, what I really don't like is when somebody does one thing but claims they're doing something else. That aggravates me. And if people's intent was to say Baen is one of the major publishers in science fiction, which it is. In terms of new titles produced every year, Baen is actually now the second largest after Tor. Not in terms of money generated, because some of the big corporate publishers have some really valuable properties, but they don't produce as many new titles as Baen does either. Baen is also far more likely to keep a mid-list writer going long enough to at least give them a decent chance at building a career, whereas a corporate publisher will cut your throat in a heartbeat. They also pick up more new writers. But so my point is, if your purpose is, okay, this is one of the major publishers of science fiction, but I think there's a problem because the discussion area they have has gotten out of control, or at least parts of it have. And I just don't think, I think that needs to be addressed. Okay. There's ways you can go about that. One of them is you write a piece that's aimed in that direction. where I don't know. I could have written exactly the same material that Sanford put in his essay. I could have written exactly the same one and written it completely differently that would not have gotten Baen's back up. May have gotten up a little bit, but not too much, and would have been clear that, hey, first of all, I would have talked to him, and then secondly, say, let's see what we can do. But that's not what the intent was. And it's the same with WorldCon. I mean, if their intent was to say, this is a problem and Baen's really got to look at it. And then fine, Tony had said she did close down Baen Bar, and she said she was going to deal with it. So at least wait till you see what she comes up with. What happened instead was people read the first statement, they started interpreting tea leaves as, well, the way she's written is, I don't think she's Jesus, what? You can't wait till you see what she actually does? No, they couldn't. They rushed to judgment. What that tells me is that they weren't in the least bit interested in solving any problem. That's not what their concern was. Quite obviously, there's no way she could have done anything in the short amount of time they gave her. And what that tells me is that what their real concern was how they looked. To a different crowd of people. Okay. You can proceed that way. It's not my tradition, and I don't have a lot of use for it.
Well, I like the principle of if you have a problem with someone, go to that person and work things out. And then maybe that forum could have been shifted and the comments could have been monitored a little differently, and Stanford might have gotten what he wanted in that respect. Maybe not as much traffic on his website, but he might have gotten changes made to the forum.
Yeah, I've been in touch with Tony. I've been talking to her. She's asked my opinion. I've given it to her. It'll be her decision. It's her website. And she's well aware, as she put it, that it'll be Bar 2.0. It's been around a very, very long time. It got started 30 years ago almost, in a very different time period. And, all kinds of things have changed. And like I said, a lot of the problems are just that old history, Politics got started as a way to just really quarantine it and protect everybody else from having to listen to it. It certainly wasn't set up as a place to hide it, from the authorities or something. Things change. I would not have objected to that, and I don't think Tony would have. But the way it was done and how it was done, at the very least, it's left a really bad taste in my mouth, and I'm sure in hers. And lots of other people too. I know because a lot of people have told me, and many of them privately, they're not going to go public with it because there's no point in it. But they're not happy about it. And
maybe we can end on a little bit of a good note. You've posted 2 different essays about this, and you've gotten a lot of response from the internet. My question is, have you seen any different perspectives coming together? Have you seen any hope for dialogue or for the book author community moving forward as a result of this?
It's too early to tell because we got to wait and see what happens with Baen Bar, which I think will be starting to unfold pretty quickly. I don't know because, these things are complicated and they tend to be ongoing. So, it's not, I don't know how to put it, but it's not as if, I think what has happened is there's been a conversation got rolling because of this, and it will continue to unfold. And we'll see what happens. One thing that you learn if you have my political history is patience. You really do. It's like, it's not easy to get human beings to change the way they do things. It's just not. And And you have to understand that, and you have to be part of what I do, and it's in my fiction too, is I try to look for the better angels of most people's natures. And most people do have better angels. Not everybody. There are some dirty, rotten bastards out there, but most people are complicated. Number one, and I don't know. I just try to see if I can move things along, but understand it's not going to be quick. You're very rarely going to see quick results, and then even when you do win something, almost invariably it's like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and 8 steps to the side is the way it usually really works. And you just have to. I don't even consider reconciling myself to it. It's not. It's the way the world is, and I think people tend to be too critical of the human race. Actually, I mean, it's not that we don't have all kinds of faults and things that need to be corrected, but I think people often lose perspective. Civilization's only been around for about 5,000, maybe 6,000 years at most, and that's only in some parts of the world. And we've gone from where a huge part of a society's resources and work was devoted to building a giant tomb for one guy, to where we can see almost to the edge of the universe and almost back to the beginning of time in 5,000 years. That's impressive as all hell. And that's the yardstick I think you need to use to measure things. Just don't lose hope, but be patient, because it's especially not going to come quickly if you're measuring it by your lifespan. And I think part of the problem is people have a tendency to try to measure human history by their lifespan, and if you do that, it's like, well, no, you're going to be gone, but the human race will keep chugging along.
I will say that is a big number one that I've heard since the beginning of my authory career, is patience. Patience in all things. Patience in your writing, patience in your characters developing, in your world developing, in finding your readers, in sharing your opinions, how you share those, doing all the ads, all the things. It takes a patience. Just gotta breathe it out, right? Take a break sometimes. Thank you so much, Eric, for coming on and, giving us a little bit more about all this and on what's, really happening, and, getting another voice out there about it.
Okay. Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. All right. So before I close this out, did you have something to say, Lauren?
We do have those 2 announcements to make.
Yes, that's what. Am I cutting out right now?
No,
really
you're
bad.
good.
No. Okay. Do it really quick before I totally die on my internets. We do need some volunteers to submit published works for next week's episode. Why isn't my book selling? Ooh. Athon Publishers Steve Bollier and Rhett Bruno will be joining us to take a look at your books and give feedback on your cover, your blurb, and a 1-sentence culmination of your marketing strategy. Mind blown. All right, you can find more info to come on this in the Keystroke Medium Facebook page, so please stay tuned for that. Also, on Monday, March 8th, she has been chatted about a little bit in this show, and we are going to have her on with Josh and Scott. Tony Weiskopf, Baen Editor-in-Chief, will be live on the March 8th Monday show, so definitely keep a lookout. Stay tuned for that. And yeah, with that, for Lauren Moore, I am Kalene Williams. Thank you for joining us on another day of your writer's journey. Be sure to check us out next week, where we're going to talk about more reading, writing, and everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium's The Writer's Journey.